Hi guys. Tonight we are not in your cozy, centrally heated bedroom. Instead, you are standing inside the echoing corridors of a medieval castle. The walls around you are made of stone, thick, grey, and unyielding. At first glance they look majestic, almost reassuring, but lean closer, and you feel the chill seeping into your bones. Each block of granite acts like an icy sponge, drinking in the warmth of any fire, and holding on to cold like a jealous dragon. You tug your cloak a little tighter, because let's be honest, without modern insulation you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, post your location and the local time in the comments. I'm always curious who's tuning in from which part of the world. Now, dim the lights. You trudge along the passageway, your footsteps muffled by rushes scattered across the floor. They do little to soften the cold. The air here tastes of smoke and damp lime. Torches flicker, but their flames hardly cut the gloom. In a storm, the wind forces itself through arrow slits and gaps in the wooden shutters. The castle is a fortress, yes, but not against winter. Against a blizzard, it feels more like a vast icebox. Nobles might boast of their thick walls and lofty towers, but those very features make heating a nightmare. A mainstream fact: the average medieval fireplace could only warm a radius of a few feet, leaving the rest of the hall bitterly cold. And while today we talk about energy efficiency, back then efficiency was measured by how many logs you could spare before the stores ran out. Quirky details emerge too. In some records, travelers noted how residents hung strips of salted meat directly above the hearth, not only for convenience, but because the constant heat prevented the cuts from freezing solid. So you might find yourself drifting to sleep with the scent of smoked pork hanging over your head. Odd, perhaps, but practical. Historians still argue whether castle builders truly underestimated the cold when designing these strongholds, or if they deliberately prioritized military strength over comfort. Some scholars claim the harshness of the stone halls was accepted as a badge of resilience, while others suggest that later renovations like adding chimneys and wall hangings prove that medieval people were simply desperate to correct architectural oversights. As you wander deeper into the keep, you hear the moan of wind rushing through cracks where the mason's mortar has crumbled. Every corner becomes a miniature whistle. Imagine trying to sleep with those ghostly notes singing through the night. You might roll over, pressing your cloak to your ears, but the music of the storm seeps in regardless. Your breath fogs before your face. At night, without bustling servants and roaring fires, temperatures inside can sink nearly as low as outside. This explains why most people did not drift through hallways after dark. They clung instead to whichever chamber offered the faintest promise of warmth. You might envy the great hall's hearth, yet even there, flames lick upward while your back tingles from the draught behind. To survive such nights, medieval households relied on sheer adaptation. You imagine the sound of heavy doors being barred, straw stuffed along thresholds to plug the gaps. Children whimper as their mothers herd them beneath woolen blankets. A guard stomps his boots, shaking snow onto the flagstones before collapsing beside the fire, grateful just to be inside the fortress rather than on the ramparts. Even here in section 1 of our story, you realize survival is not about luxury. It is about layers, numbers, and ingenuity. Stone walls may keep enemies out, but they let the cold in. The night stretches long. The blizzard howls against the towers, and you, wrapped in scratchy fabric and breathing shallow, must convince yourself that morning will eventually come. You step off the draughty stair and push open a heavy oaken door bound in iron. The hinges groan, but inside you find a quieter world, the Lord's solar, the private chamber, set aside for warmth, rest, and something resembling comfort. Compared to the echoing great hall, this room feels smaller, more intimate, and at least by medieval standards luxurious. The walls are still stone, of course, but here they are, plastered and occasionally painted, their chill softened by thick tapestries. The flicker of a brazier in the corner sends shadows tumbling up the walls, and for the first time all evening, you sense the possibility of warmth. This solar is where the Lord and his close family might withdraw on stormy nights, seeking to escape the frigid breath of the blizzard. A mainstream historical fact. Many medieval castles eventually added solars specifically to provide a warmer, private alternative to the vast communal Great Hall. They often sat on upper floors where sunlight, if any managed to shine, could seep through small glazed windows, rare luxuries at the time. Yet even with the brazier glowing and the windows shuttered, you can still feel a draught curling across the floor like a sly serpent. The furniture here helps. A heavy bed draped with woolen blankets sits against the wall, its posts rising toward the ceiling. Chairs are padded with cushions stuffed with feathers or wool. A wooden chest rests by the bed, perhaps containing more blankets, or even fur cloaks brought in from the hunting grounds. Still, you shiver, because while the brazier burns, the smoke has to curl up a hole in the ceiling, and some of it inevitably drifts back, filling the chamber with an acrid tang. Imagine falling asleep with your eyes watering, nose smarting, yet grateful that the sting of smoke at least means the fire is burning. Quirky details emerge in such spaces. There are accounts of nobles keeping small, portable stoves, little clay or metal pots filled with hot embers that they carried into their bedchambers. One could be placed beneath a stool, another under the bed, though the risk of fire was ever present. Picture the Lord shifting nervously, hoping the glowing pot beneath him warms without setting the rushes alight. More unusual still, some records suggest that wealthy households placed heated bricks, wrapped in cloth, at the foot of their beds. Your toes might sigh with relief, but your imagination stirs uneasily, wondering if the cloth smoulders in the night. Historians still debate how effective these private chambers truly were. Some argue that the solar was a genuine improvement, offering a sanctuary from the worst of the cold, while others believe it was largely symbolic, more about showing status than achieving real warmth. After all, stone is stone, and heat escapes faster than it can be trapped. Was the solar a comfort, or simply the illusion of one? Scholars disagree, but standing here with your teeth chattering, you might lean toward the latter. In the solar, the sensory experience sharpens. The brazier crackles, faintly spitting as damp logs give off steam. The air tastes metallic, tinged with iron from the poker resting in the embers. The rush mat beneath your feet emits a grassy, almost sweet smell, though hints of last week's spilled ale linger. Draperies hang along the wall, embroidered with scenes of hunting stags or charging knights, but they are more than decoration. They serve as insulation, thin shields against the relentless stone. Run your fingers along the fabric and you'll feel the chill trapped behind, as though the wall itself is a sleeping giant breathing frost into the room. You imagine the Lord himself retreating here on a winter's night, slipping off his fur-lined cloak and lowering himself onto the bed. His boots thunk against the floorboards. A servant hurries to pour him a cup of warmed wine, spiced with cloves and honey, for even the wealthiest knew that a hot drink before sleep was a simple balm against the cold. A cat may leap onto the chest by the bed, curling into a circle of fur, while a dog snuffles contentedly at the foot. These companions add heat, but also a sense of companionship when the blizzard rattles the shutters like skeletal fingers. The solar represents privilege. Not every castle resident sees its warmth. Servants and guards linger outside in darker halls, their breath misting in the torchlight, while only a select few enjoy this chamber's meagre comforts. You might envy them, but then you notice how the draught under the door still creeps across the Lord's toes, how the brazier sputters when the wind howls, how his lady still pulls her fur robe tighter, despite the cushions and tapestries. Even the powerful cannot escape the season. One mainstream example from history, at Kenilworth Castle in England, records describe the solar as a place where the Lord's family might dine separately during winter, seeking warmth away from the cavernous hall. Yet even there, fires could not erase the reality of medieval cold. Servants carried steaming dishes across icy floors, hoping the food did not freeze before it reached the table. A quirky footnote comes from a French manuscript describing how some lords hung entire animal pelts on their solar walls: wolf skins, bear hides, even the occasional lynx. Not only did this insulate the chamber, it served as proof of hunting prowess. Imagine drifting to sleep beneath the glassy stare of a wolf hide pinned above your head. Comforting or disquieting? Perhaps both. You wonder, did these solars truly help people survive the blizzards, or did they merely shift the struggle to a smaller arena? Historians still argue whether their construction marked a real architectural evolution or simply a social one. Were they about warmth, or about separation, drawing a line between those who had access to heated chambers and those who shivered elsewhere? The evidence bends both ways, and as you stand in the room, listening to the storm battering the shutters, you cannot help but feel the thinness of the veil between security and hardship. The blizzard outside roars on, snow pelts the narrow window, and the wooden frame shudders. Inside, the brazier flares, momentarily brightening the embroidered figures on the tapestry. You see the stitched deer leap as though alive, the hounds straining at invisible leashes, and then the flame subsides, shadows swallowing them whole. In that ebb of light, the chamber becomes less a sanctuary and more a reminder. Comfort here is fragile, conditional, temporary. You pull your cloak close once more, brushing past the heavy curtains of the bed. They swing slightly, their folds smelling faintly of lanolin and lavender. Within, the air feels trapped, warmer than outside, though still far from cozy. It is a trick of architecture, of fabric and fire, of people's desperate attempts to carve a pocket of warmth from the glacial grip of the castle. As you lower yourself onto the edge of the mattress, the straw beneath the linen rustles softly, and for a fleeting moment, you almost believe you are safe from the blizzard's rage. Almost. You leave the Lord's solar and wander back toward the great hall, where the vast space swallows you up. The fire here, once lively, has begun to sink into glowing embers. Shadows sprawl across the rafters, and the sound of the storm outside is muffled by the sheer thickness of the stone walls. Yet for all its grandeur, the great hall offers little in the way of true comfort. This is where many of the household's servants and retainers spend their nights, rolled in cloaks or lying side by side, clinging to whatever warmth they can find. The great hall was the beating heart of castle life, and not only during feasts or ceremonies. Historical records describe how, at night, retainers and lower-ranking servants spread across the floor in rough bedding of straw or rushes. You can picture them curled up near the hearth, jockeying for the best position, while others resigned themselves to draughts creeping through the farthest corners. It was a scene of hierarchy even in sleep. The closer you were to the fire, the higher your standing, or simply the quicker you moved when embers began to fade. One curious practice emerges here. Some households kept a single candle burning throughout the night, not for light but to provide a sense of security and continuity. It wasn't enough to illuminate the hall. Instead, it glowed faintly, like a star in a cavernous sky. Servants would roll over in the night, glimpse that fragile flame, and feel reassured they had not been abandoned to darkness. Imagine lying on your back, eyes heavy, tracing smoke curling toward the beams, soot drifting gently like snow indoors. The question of how tolerable this sleeping arrangement was remains unsettled among scholars. Some argue that human bodies pressed together under shared blankets produced a surprising amount of heat, making the communal hall bearable even during the worst winters. Others suggest the cold was unrelenting, and that servants endured nights so frigid they barely rested. The evidence is contradictory. One traveller's diary paints the hall as cozy and bustling, while another complains of breath freezing on mustaches before dawn. Your senses fill with the experience. You hear muffled coughs as someone shifts beneath a rough woolen cloak. A guard snores nearby, boots still on, his sword within reach. The hall smells of smoke and mead, of salted meat hanging high in the rafters, and of the faint ammonia of rushes that have not been changed in weeks. The floor beneath you is uneven, packed dirt under scattered reeds. You shift for comfort, pulling your own cloak tighter, but no position seems to soften the hardness. The retainers whisper among themselves before drifting off, voices low so as not to wake their superiors. Perhaps they joke about the snow piling up outside, or about a hare they spotted that morning. Perhaps they grumble about whose turn it will be to rise early and stoke the fire. These little exchanges carry warmth of their own, the comfort of routine and companionship in a life full of cold uncertainties. Archaeological evidence confirms that fires in great halls often burned continuously through the night. Servants were tasked with feeding logs into the flames until dawn. This wasn't just about heat, it was also about protection. A smouldering hearth could easily spark a blaze, and having someone awake to watch it was a safeguard against catastrophe. Picture a weary servant nodding off, only to jolt awake when sparks snap against the stones, reminding him that vigilance is the price of survival. One odd habit surfaces in chronicles from Northern Europe. Some households kept large dogs inside the hall, specifically to lie among the servants, sharing their body heat. These dogs were not just companions but living heaters, prized for their ability to curl up against cold bodies through the night. You imagine the comfort of a furry flank pressed against your side as the wind whistles through unseen cracks. There's still disagreement among experts about whether these communal sleeping arrangements fostered true rest. Was it easy to sleep amid the snoring, coughing, and shifting of dozens of bodies? Or was the hall more a place of restless dozing, where exhaustion forced people under whether or not comfort was possible? The evidence is fragmentary, but the question lingers. Perhaps both were true, depending on the severity of the winter and the resilience of the sleeper. You close your eyes and let the sensations wash over you. The crackle of the fire, the low hum of voices fading into silence, the sharp bite of cold on your exposed nose, the tickle of rushes under your cheek. Sleep here is not luxury, it is survival. Each body adds to the heat of the next. Each blanket is pulled a little tighter. Each dream is shaped by the howl of the storm outside. And as you drift towards slumber among servants and guards, you realize that in a medieval castle, comfort was never guaranteed, only borrowed in fleeting moments before the cold returned to claim its share. The fire in the great hall dwindles further as you rise and step into one of the side corridors. Your boots crunch softly on the rushes scattered across the stone floor. At first glance, they seem like little more than a messy carpet of straw and reeds, but those rushes are part of an entire medieval system of survival. You bend down, touch them, and feel their dampness. They are replaced only a few times a year in many castles, with new layers spread directly over the old, creating a patchwork of grass, herbs, dirt, and whatever else the household had underfoot. Why did they use them? Partly for comfort, partly for warmth. Contemporary records mention that rushes helped insulate the floor, which otherwise would have been bare, stone-cold as ice and unforgiving. Walking barefoot across stone in winter would leach heat from your body in seconds, so even a thin layer of plant matter provided a buffer. And as you walk over them, the sound is soft and rustling, far less echoing than bootsteps on bare rock. Some castle inventories reveal curious habits. Herbs such as lavender, thyme, or rosemary were often mixed into the rushes. The fragrant plants masked the smell of damp straw and rotting food scraps that inevitably fell to the floor. For a brief moment, imagine the mingling aromas, the sweetness of lavender crushed beneath your heel, the earthy musk of dried reeds, the sour note of spilled ale, and the unmistakable tang of smoke drifting down from torches. This was the smellscape of medieval winter nights. Not everyone agrees on just how useful those rushes were. Some researchers insist they offered real insulation and comfort, while others argue that the constant dampness only made rooms colder and more unhealthy. After all, layers of decomposing rushes harbored insects, mold, and fleas. Did they trap warmth or disease? Evidence points both ways, and the truth may depend on the care of the household. In a well-managed castle, rushes might indeed have been refreshed often and sprinkled with herbs. In a poorer or neglected one, they might have turned into fetid mulch that chilled sleepers more than it protected them. You take a few steps further into the corridor, hearing your boots scuff across the rushes. The sound is gentle, like a whisper, as though the castle itself breathes with each step. A servant darts past you, carrying an armful of fresh reeds, his arms trembling under the load. He will scatter them near the hearth, where people lie close to the fire, giving them at least the illusion of fresh bedding. There is an odd story in a 14th century account of a feast where noble guests complained about the rushes being so thick that their boots sank ankle deep. Apparently, the steward had overdone it, trying to impress with abundance. Guests tripped, servants stumbled, and laughter rang through the hall. It's a small reminder that even practical things could become ridiculous when pride entered the picture. As you picture yourself lying on the rush-strewn floor, you realize how little separates you from the raw earth. There's a faint scent of mildew rising from beneath, where older layers have begun to rot. Your cheek brushes the rough stems, scratching slightly, but it's still better than resting directly on stone that radiates cold. In the silence of the night, those who slept here would have shifted, rolled, pulled cloaks tighter, and prayed their place near the hearth would be enough to fend off frostbite. There's a practical rhythm to it. Servants replaced rushes more frequently in winter, not just for hygiene but because damp reeds conducted cold faster. Drier, fresher bundles offered more insulation. Archaeological digs in certain castles have revealed compacted layers of rushes, preserved beneath collapsed walls, proving just how thick these accumulations could get. Some layers were over a foot deep, essentially a plant carpet designed to fight the cold. Of course, the debate continues among historians. Did these layers actually trap warmth effectively, or did they serve more as symbolic cleanliness? Some argue that the aromatic herbs sprinkled among them had more psychological effect than practical warmth. Others counter that even a thin natural mat could break the transfer of heat from body to stone, making the difference between tolerable sleep and misery. The answer likely lies somewhere in between. Picture the great hall at its quietest moment. Fires low, bodies curled in rows, dogs sprawled between servants, and everywhere the smell of crushed greenery underfoot. It isn't luxurious, but it is communal. The rushes create a shared ground that both softens and unifies the space. When dawn comes, people rise, shake off the reeds stuck to their cloaks, and scatter toward their duties, leaving the floor looking more like a barn than a lord's chamber. And yet, night after night it served. As you turn to leave the corridor, your hand brushes the wall, cool and damp against your fingers. The rushes rustle one last time under your step. They were never meant to be a perfect solution, only a compromise, part bedding, part insulation, part deodorizer. But in a castle battered by a blizzard, compromises were what kept people alive. The snow may rage against the shutters, the wind may find its way through cracks, but underfoot lies a reminder. Sometimes, survival is about small comforts, like a handful of herbs mixed with straw beneath a weary body. You pause at the edge of the hall and notice the shapes of people bundled under rough coverings. What strikes you next is not the stone walls or the smell of damp rushes, but the sheer variety of fabrics heaped upon them. If there was one essential defense against the bitter breath of a blizzard, it was cloth layer upon layer of wool, linen, fur, and sometimes even silk for the fortunate few. These textiles were not just luxuries, they were lifelines. Wool was king. Contemporary accounts describe it as the most reliable insulator, spun thick and woven into blankets, cloaks, and tunics. Even coarse wool, scratchy against the skin, held warmth far better than anything else available. The castle's storerooms often overflowed with woolen goods, both for household use and for trade. As you pull one across your shoulders, you feel its weight press down, heavy but comforting, the fibers rough, yet oddly reassuring. That sensation of heaviness was part of its magic. To lie beneath wool was to feel anchored against the cold, as if the storm outside had less power over you. Linen, in contrast, was lighter and softer, but it was rarely used alone. People slept between linen sheets when they could, layering wool or fur over them. The combination of textures mattered. Linen wicked moisture away, keeping sweat from chilling the body, while wool trapped heat. Archaeological finds of medieval bedding often reveal these mixtures: fabrics sewn together, scraps recycled from old garments, every piece pressed into service. Survival meant nothing was wasted. Fur, however, was the crown jewel. Chronicles note how nobles slept beneath fox, bear, or even ermine pelts. Imagine lying down while servants draped such hides over you, the smell of musk and wild forest clinging faintly to them. Fur not only provided insulation, but carried symbolic weight. To sleep under the skin of a predator was to proclaim dominion over nature. Yet practicality underpinned even that symbolism. Fur was astonishingly warm, and in a castle besieged by snow, its value was beyond price. Travelers' diaries provide odd glimpses into these nightly routines. One Italian visitor to England remarked with surprise at how many layers northerners piled onto their beds, joking that it was like sleeping beneath an entire herd of sheep. To him, the sight seemed almost comical, but to those living through northern winters, it was a matter of survival. You can picture yourself lying flat, hardly able to move under the weight of the blankets, but grateful that the immobility at least meant warmth. There's still debate among historians about how widely furs were used by ordinary castle folk. Some suggest that only the wealthy could afford them, while others argue that rabbit and sheepskin were common enough to appear in servants' quarters. The evidence is fragmentary, but it hints at a spectrum: rare pelts for lords, everyday skins for retainers, and scratchy wool for everyone else. The lines blur when inventories list skins without specifying their type. Were they luxury items or humble scraps? The uncertainty lingers. You shift your weight, imagining the feel of layered garments against your skin. Medieval sleepers often wore clothing to bed, unlike our modern custom of undressing for the night. A long tunic, thick stockings, and even a hooded coif might accompany someone under the covers. The logic was simple. Why surrender any warmth your clothes had gathered during the day? To peel them off would be to invite frost onto bare flesh. The rustle of fabric as people turned in their sleep would have been constant, a low chorus of wool and linen brushing in the darkness. There is a curious anecdote about the Countess of Hainault, who supposedly slept with not one but two fur mantles over her bedclothes during a fierce winter storm. The story goes that she declared herself wrapped as snug as any babe in swaddling, a rare moment of humour preserved in a court record. Such exaggerations remind us that while survival was serious, people still found ways to laugh at their own bundles of fabric. The sensory picture deepens. You inhale the lanolin scent of wool, faintly greasy, mingling with the sharper tang of smoke from the hearth. The touch of fur is dense and soft under your fingertips, each hair bristling with trapped warmth. When you press your cheek against the linen beneath, it is cool at first, then slowly warming, like a handshake with a friend reluctant to let go. Yet, despite all these precautions, the chill never truly left. You imagine waking in the dead of night, the fire reduced to embers, and feeling your nose frozen, even while your body sweats beneath layers of blankets. Breath crystallizes in the air, drifting upward like tiny ghosts. To survive, you simply pull the coverings tighter, burying yourself deeper into the cocoon, praying morning comes quickly. Records show that storerooms were carefully managed in winter. Stewards tallied the number of blankets and furs, ensuring they were allocated where most needed. In some households, extra coverings were lent to favoured retainers during the coldest spells. In others, they were hoarded, locked in chests, used only when noble guests arrived. The politics of fabric shaped who slept warmly and who shivered through the storm. One peculiar tradition noted in Scandinavia was the use of reindeer hides spread hair side up as bed covers. Their hollow hairs trapped heat so efficiently that even in the fiercest snowstorms, sleepers remained insulated. Travelers marveled at this practice, sometimes adopting it temporarily before returning home to their less exotic sheepskins. It's an image that lingers. The wind shrieking outside, the castle rattling in its foundations, and you lying snug beneath the hide of a creature built by nature to endure exactly such trials. Modern historians continue to question just how much warmth all these layers could realistically provide. Could wool and fur truly stand against temperatures that froze water barrels solid inside castle kitchens? Some argue yes, pointing to the insulating power of natural fibers. Others doubt, suggesting that even with the best bedding, sleep was often shallow, broken by shivers, and the need to huddle closer to companions. The truth, as always, likely lies in a mixture moments of comfort, punctuated by hours of discomfort, endurance stitched together by fabric. As you close your eyes, the blizzard still howls against the shutters, but within your cocoon of wool and fur, there is a fragile peace. Your limbs grow heavy, your breath steadies, and for a brief while, you almost forget the storm.